I will make you the father of many nations. Genesis 17 verse 4. These words forever changed the destiny of Abraham, an ordinary man called to an extraordinary mission. In a time when old age was seen as the end of possibilities, God made a bold promise. Abraham would become the patriarch of a great lineage. Imagine the confusion and astonishment at hearing that he, a childless man with a barren wife, would become the father of an innumerable multitude. Abraham not only became the father of Isaac, but also the spiritual father of all who follow faith, Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike. His story is not just about achievements, but about unshakable faith in the face of difficult circumstances. He teaches us what it means to trust in God's promises, even when everything seems to indicate otherwise. Would you have the courage to leave everything behind and follow a divine call with no guarantees? Abraham did. His obedience and trust in God are marks that resonate to this day, challenging us to reflect on what it means to live by faith. Abraham's story is one of the most profound and inspiring in the Bible because it shows us the power of faith and obedience. He was tested repeatedly, faced moments of great uncertainty, and challenges that shaped his life and the destiny of future generations. Every step Abraham took into the unknown was sustained by his trust in God's faithfulness. This trust continues to inspire millions around the world to this day. Before he was known as Abraham, he was Abram, a man living in the prosperous city of Ur of the Chaldeans. He had built a comfortable life, surrounded by his family and wealth. However, God had a bigger plan, one that would change his life forever. God said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Genesis 12 verse 1. Imagine the impact of these words on someone who is already 75 years old with an established life. Even so, Abram obeyed. Abram's faith was not based on what he saw or understood. He didn't know where God would lead him, but trusted in his promise. This already shows Abram's character, a man willing to give up everything for a higher calling. God had promised to make him a great nation, but at that moment, Abram still had no children. The promise seemed distant, almost impossible. Yet his faith was enough to gather his family and head into the unknown, taking his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, and all his possessions. This act of obedience was not just a practical matter of moving to another place. Abram was leaving behind his comfort zone, his security, and his home to follow an uncertain path, guided only by trust in God. Every step on that journey was a reaffirmation of his faith. In a world where security is often measured by what we can see and control, Abram teaches us the value of trusting the unseen, of relying on divine promises even when circumstances seem unfavorable. After receiving the divine call, Abram set out for Canaan, an unknown land, taking with him his wife, his nephew, and all his belongings. Abram's decision was undoubtedly an act of great faith. Canaan was a promising land, but full of uncertainties and dangers. He had no maps, guides, or guarantees of success. All he had was God's promise that this would be the land of his descendants. The journey was long and full of challenges. Abram's caravan was not small. He had his wife Sarah, his nephew Lot, his servants, and all his goods. They crossed arid deserts, endured scorching heat, and finally arrived in Canaan. When Abram arrived, he found a land inhabited by the Canaanites, strange and potentially hostile peoples. The presence of other peoples could have caused fear, but Abram trusted in God's promise. In Genesis 12, verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." In response, Abram built an altar to the Lord, expressing his faith and gratitude. However, life in Canaan was far from peaceful. A severe famine struck the region, forcing Abram to temporarily go down to Egypt for sustenance. Imagine the confusion Abram must have felt. After answering God's call, he found himself in the midst of an unexpected crisis. Yet he remained steadfast. Abram went to Egypt to find food, but he didn't abandon his trust in God's promises. In Egypt, Abram faced another challenge. Fearing for his life because of Sarah's beauty, he asked her to say that she was his sister. Though this decision caused problems, God, faithful to his promises, protected Abram and his family. When Pharaoh discovered the truth, he returned Sarah to Abram and let them leave, enriched with goods and livestock. Thus, Abram returned to Canaan, even more blessed than when he had left, reinforcing his faith in God's provision and protection. Back in Canaan, Abram and his nephew Lot faced a new challenge. The land could no longer support both of their large flocks. Disputes began to arise between Abram's herdsmen and Lot's, and once again, Abram was tested in his ability to make wise decisions. Showing great maturity and humility, he proposed to Lot that they separate peacefully. "Let there be no strife between you and me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left." Genesis 13, verses 8 to 9. Lot chose the Jordan Valley, a fertile land near the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. It seemed like the best choice, but Lot didn't know that he would be living near corrupt cities. Abram, on the other hand, stayed in the lands of Canaan, where God's promise still stood. After the separation, God appeared to Abram again, reaffirming his promises. "Lift up your eyes now, all the land that you see. I will give to you and your descendants forever." Genesis 13, verses 14 to 15. Abram built another altar to the Lord in Hebron, reaffirming his trust in God's promises. Despite God's promises, Abram still had no children. In a moment of vulnerability, he expressed his doubts to God. "What will you give me, since I continue childless?" Genesis 15, verse 2. Abram was aging, and the promise seemed more and more distant. However, God, in his patience, reassured Abram that he would have an heir of his own. God took him outside the tent and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, so shall your offspring be." Genesis 15, verse 5. Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. To seal this promise, God made a formal covenant with Abram, promising him not only numerous descendants but also the land of Canaan. Abram prepared a sacrifice as God had instructed, and the Lord made an eternal covenant with him, reaffirming his promises. This moment was a milestone in Abram's faith journey, as God not only guaranteed his protection, but also the certainty that his promises would be fulfilled. God's protection became evident when Abram had to rescue his nephew Lot, who had been captured in a battle between kings. With only 318 men, Abram defeated the kings and rescued Lot and his belongings. This episode showed that God was with Abram, ensuring his safety and success in every situation. Abraham's greatest test of faith came when God asked him for something unimaginable: to sacrifice his son Isaac. Isaac was the son of the promise, the heir through whom Abraham's descendants would multiply. But in Genesis 22 verses 1-2, God asked, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering." This request must have caused an internal conflict in Abraham. How could the God who promised a great lineage now ask for the sacrifice of the very heir? However, Abraham didn't hesitate. He left the next day with Isaac and 2 servants toward Mount Moriah. Abraham's anguish must have been immense during the journey, especially when Isaac asked, "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb?" Genesis 22 verse 7. Abraham replied with faith, "God himself will provide the lamb." Genesis 22 verse 8. When they arrived at the place, Abraham prepared the altar and bound Isaac. But at the decisive moment, God stopped him and provided a ram for the sacrifice. This episode marked Abraham's faith, as he trusted God to the end, even when everything seemed contrary to the promises. God reaffirmed to Abraham that, because of his obedience, he would be the father of descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky. Abraham lived to be 175 years old. He saw the growth of his lineage through Isaac and ensured that the child of the promise had a faithful wife, Rebekah. After the death of his beloved wife Sarah, Abraham bought the field of Machpelah to bury her, the first piece of land in the promised land. Even in death, he trusted in God's promises. Abraham was buried beside Sarah by his sons Isaac and Ishmael, and his legacy of faith passed on to future generations. He is remembered as the father of faith, a man who trusted God above circumstances, and whose life continues to inspire millions of people to this day. Abraham's life teaches us that to live out God's promises, it takes courageous faith and total obedience. Just like Abraham, we may be called to trust God even when the path seems uncertain. May Abraham's journey inspire you to take steps of faith, knowing that God always fulfills his promises. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications to keep learning about great biblical characters.